Well, good evening. This is Pastor Bobby Thomas. This is The Voice. And we were away last week. Wasn't able to do the broadcast last week. We were away. But we're we're back and we're settled in and we're ready to go forth. Trust that everyone had a great worship experience on yesterday. Just want to say God bless you. We love you. From the bottom of our heart, we want you to know that we love you. And our concern is that you would receive every blessing that God has for your life, uh, every blessing in the world to come, and every blessing right now while you're living in this present world, that you would have the fullness of what God has for your life. That is my prayer for all of the saints and all of His children. That's my prayer for you, that you will be healed and delivered by the power of God, that you receive your healing, you will receive your deliverance, and everything that you need to survive in this world. We thank God, and I believe that God has made provision for all of those things. But tonight we're going to talk about Japheth revealed, and we're in part 14 of the series called Behind the Veil of Deception. And today we're going to deal with Japheth revealed. And to those that's coming on, we say God bless you. We love you. If you make a comment, if we don't respond right away, we will respond to your comment. If we don't respond during the broadcast, then we'll respond sometime after the broadcast to whatever, to your request or whatever. But today we want to talk about Japheth revealed, and last week we talked about the curse of the so-called curse of Ham, which was really the curse of Canaan, because when Noah when he awakened from his sleep, he said, "Curse be Canaan," and and most people call that the curse of Ham. And we went through nakedness, what nakedness meant, and and we went through the line of the Messiah, and how that the line of the Messiah was originally in the seed of Ham, but God moved that seed from the seed, moved that line from the seed of Ham, and He put it in the seed of Shem, and so we see uh, so far we see God having dealt with Ham, we see God dealing with Shem, but where does Japheth fit into this picture? And that's what I want to talk a little bit about tonight, is where Japheth fits in. And there's basically four things that I'm going to talk about tonight. And the first thing I want to talk about is understanding the beginning from the end. Number two, I want to talk about Lucifer's rebellion and numbers in scripture. No, not numbers in scripture, but numbers in war. And the third thing, I want to define Japheth. And the fourth, I want to talk about war against God. And when we talk about understanding the beginning from the end, this is something that we mentioned before. God bless you. God bless you. We mentioned this before about understanding the beginning from the end. And and basically what it is, if you go to the end, the book of Revelation, which gives us a light on what's going to happen in the end. What happens in the end will shed light on what actually happened in the beginning. Because when what God does at the end, He's resolving the problems that started in the beginning. He's resolving those problems. As a matter of fact, this whole earth is on a wilderness experience. Mankind is on a wilderness experience in this earth, the same way that the children of Israel went to the promised land. They went right up to the brink of the promised land, and then they would not go in because they said there were giants in the land, so they would not go in. So God caused them to wander in the wilderness for 40 years until all the doubters had died out, and then they went in to possess the promise that God had promised to the seed of Abraham. And this world is on a course similar to that of the children of Israel in the wilderness, going out wandering for 40 years. And right now, we're off of the course of God, the main course of God, in which he created this earth. When he created Adam and Eve and he breathed the breath of life into Adam, there was a course that Adam was on. Uh, in other words, I believe that he was on a course that would have caused us to live forever in righteousness, and we would have never known anything about sin and disobedience, all the things that come upon us, the sickness, the disease, all the things that we have that's going on in the earth, the catastrophes that we have that's going on in the earth, all of the things that all of the indiscretions toward humanity, the things that are going on in this world, hunger and crime, all these things. We didn't supposed to know anything about those things, but because of Adam and Eve's disobedience, it threw this whole world into a loop. And so right now we are in that loop right now. But at the end in Revelation, at the end of Revelation, when God would have put down all of the rebellion, in the case of Israel, he put down all of disbelief. But in the case of humanity, he's going to put down all of the disobedience. In the case of angels, he's going to put down all rebellion. He's going to put those to final rest. And then we'll be able to get back on course and follow the plan of God. The same with the children of Israel. After 40 years, and the doubters died out, and then God used the people that believed in his word that they could possess that land. And they went out, Joshua and Caleb went out to possess the land because they believed God. And so we're in that course right now. And so at the end, God settles two issues that are settled in the end, and I call it housekeeping. There's two major things two major housekeeping items that God has in the scheme of this creation. There's two major household or housekeeping items that he has to do. And those two things, number one is the rebellion of angels. You can read about that in chapter 14 of Isaiah, where the enemy, Satan, or at that time Lucifer, said, I'm going to exalt myself above the stars of God. I'm going to be like the Most High. So in other words, Lucifer had the idea to overthrow the throne of God. That's rebellion. And not only so, Lucifer rebelled, and so that issue, that's an item of house cleaning that needs to be done in heaven. So Lucifer's rebellion has to be dealt with, and it has to be put to final rest. Not only that, but then in Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve, they were disobedient to God, which caused sin to come into humanity. And so that's the second point, or the second item that God has to deal with, and he has to put it to final rest. And so that is the rebellion of angels, number one, and number two, it is the disobedience of man. So those two things, the book of Revelation deals with those two things, God putting them to final rest. So if you saw that's what happened in the end, then we know what's happening in the beginning. And so whatever happened in the beginning and the end, everything in between there has to line up with what happened in the beginning and what happened in the end. And so when you look at the total scope of the plan of God in this world right now, which I don't believe we're in the total plan of God. We're in God's plan of redemption. But the total plan of redemption that God has set forth in this earth right now, the total scope of that has to line up with those two things: the rebellion of angels, the disobedience of man, and then the consummation of this thing when God is finished cleaning house. When he finally cleans the house, all rebellion will be put down, and all disobedience will be put down, and everything in between there has to line up with those two things. When you begin to look at some of the different things that's happening in the world today, those things have to line up within those two within those 2 points, the beginning and the end. It has to line up. If it doesn't line up with that, then I'll listen to it, I will consider it. But if it don't line up with that, usually I'm going somewhere else, because because I know what the beginning is and I know what the end is, and we know what happens in the end, and the end shows us what happens in the beginning. All right. So Satan's rebellion, and those are two major things that happen: Satan's rebellion and the number of spiritual warfare. So there's some numbers we need to look at when we talk about Satan's rebellion, because with Satan, 1/3 of the angels rebelled with Satan. So 1/3 in Revelation 12:3 and 4, it said, "There appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his head. And his tail drew the 1/3 part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born." And that's in reference to Israel being born. But really, what I want you to see is, right, the dragon, the tail of the dragon. It said drew the 1/3 part, or 1/3 of the angels. They fell with Satan. So when Lucifer was cast out, 1/3 of the angels went with him. And Jesus said, "I beheld Satan fall from heaven as lightning." He fell from heaven. So in other words, God put him out with a quickness, because he came out like lightning. Because there's no one that is comparable to God Almighty, to God Himself. There's no one comparable. And there's only one God. There's only one place for God. And when Lucifer tried to take that spot, he was cast out like lightning from heaven. And not only was he cast out, but it said that his tail drew the 1/3 part of the angels, or the sons of God. And so 1/3 of the angels are with Lucifer. And if you look at those, when you look at those numbers, when you talk about war coming against, when one nation come against another nation, you have to count up the cost of whether or not you can win the war or not. And one of the things, when you count up the cost to win a war, do you have enough forces? Do you have enough forces to overcome the enemy that you're getting ready to attack? And when you look at what happened, Satan took 1/3 of the angels with him. They rebelled with him, and so that left 2/3 of the angels with God, that remained with God. So you had 1/3 of the angels and with Satan, 2/3 with God, and so when you talk about coming against, so when Satan talks about coming against God and overthrowing God, is no way militarily that he could overthrow the throne of God with 1/3 of the angels, while God has 2/3, and that doesn't count God Himself, just the angels, just the angels. 2/3 of the angels is no way possible. Is no way angelically possible that 1/3 of the angels could overthrow 2/3 of the angels, and then above that, then overthrow God Himself. So it's just no way possible that Satan could even think that he could overthrow God. So there had to be some kind of way that the enemy could expand his forces, and this is where Japheth comes into play. And when we define Japheth, according to Strong's, Japheth, his name means expansion. And when Noah woke up and he said, "Cursed be Canaan, blessed be Shem," and he said that Japheth would be enlarged. And here we see in the Strong's Concordance, Japheth means expansion. Okay, so when you look at Japheth, his name means expansion, and Satan needed a way to expand his forces that he could fight against the armies of God. And this, when we get to Revelation, you find out that Satan has put together forces of men. He has forces of men and forces of angels that have come together to fight against God and to overthrow God. And so this is where and Japheth is the instrument that Satan uses to overthrow. In other words, to build his forces, that he can think he has enough forces where he can overthrow the throne of God. And his name means expansion. And as you begin to even as you look at history, over world history, you begin to find out this is exactly what he did. He expanded over the whole world. He expanded over and divided and conquered the whole world, because that's what his name means. His name means expansion. And so that is where Satan got his ability to expand his forces. He had 1/3 force of the angelic host, and now he's expanding his forces through humanity. And so when we look at the strategy of war, we're going to look at Satan's strategy, and then we're going to look at God's strategy. And but when you look at the strategy, so what would be Satan's strategy? When you look at it, he's been first of all, he's been cast out of heaven. That's the first thing you have to consider. He's been cast out of heaven. He does not have a place of operation. So he needs to have a place of operation. And God recreated the earth. So his strategy would be, number one, he has to have a place of operation. So he has to assume, in some kind of way, he has to assume the authority over the earth. And then after he assumed the authority over the earth, some kind of way he has to expand his forces through humanity, that he can build the numbers. Because war, one thing about war is about numbers. Not least you got nuclear bombs, and then I guess it's about numbers. In it. Who has the most sophisticated, and which one can strike first? So but either way, when you talk about nuclear weapons, if one fire and the other one fire, they all gone. So it's like an even fight. But when you just talk about just men and people, it's the numbers. It counts about who's going to win a battle, who's going to be able to overcome who, unless God is on your side. Because with God, it don't take big numbers with God, because he can take a few men and do what a natural king or a natural army could do with 10,000s of soldiers, thousands and thousands of soldiers. God could just take, just as in the case with Gideon, he just took a few men to do his job. He didn't take a lot of people, but God can do that. But when it comes to men against men, when it comes to Satan, Satan has to build his numbers that he can think that he can overthrow the throne of God. So he has to assume authority over the earth, and then his strategy would be to expand the forces through humanity. And this happens in Genesis chapter 3, and you can see that in Genesis 3:15, when God said he would put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. And so when you talk about the seed of the serpent, and you'll hear me say this many times, that the seed of the serpent could not be little snakes. It had to be people. And so when Adam disobeyed God, Adam and Eve, they disobeyed God, they subjected all of humanity to the will of Satan. This is why in St. John 8:44, Jesus speaking to some of the Jews, which they said, we have Abraham to our father. They have the right and the claim to the things of God. But when Jesus talked to them, he said, you are of your father the devil. And he was a liar from the beginning. And he said, and you are just like him. So in other words, they laid claim on the promise of God. But Jesus, looking deeper into who they were, said, look, you don't belong to God. You belong to the devil. And when he said that, he was referring directly back to when Adam and Eve disobeyed God, and they subjugated all of humanity to the will of Satan. So Satan became the father of humanity, which gave him the place of operation. It gave him He assumed the authority back over the earth. He stole it. He deceived Adam, stole it from Adam. He assumed the authority. Not only did he assume authority, but by doing that, by Adam's disobedience, it subjugated all of humanity, which gave a place for Satan to expand his forces in the earth where he could fight against God. And when these two things happen, when he has a place of operation and he has expanded his forces, then his next thing would be to overthrow God, to overthrow God and take the place of God. And of course, we know that the devil is deceived, and we know that he's not going to be able to overthrow God, because the end of the story has already been written, and we already know what it is. And Satan cannot overthrow the throne of God. And then, so if Satan has a strategy, then God has a strategy also. And so, what would be God's strategy? And when if you look at Revelation, I think it's chapter 8 and chapter 9, where it talks about the 7 trumpets. And when God causes the 7 trumpets to sound, there's several things that he does. What he's doing, he's taking away the advantage of the enemy. Because it's matter of fact, the Bible says the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and it belongs to God because he's a sovereign God. It belongs to God. But Adam gave the authority to Satan. So now Satan has the authority over the earth. And since he has authority over the earth, he has expanded his forces, and he's using this earth as a base where he can overthrow God. And so what God does, he takes in the 7 trumpets, and I believe this is God's war strategy against the enemy. In the 7 trumpets, what he does on the first trumpet, he takes away 1/3 of the trees and the grass. So whatever advantage that the enemy would have among the trees and in the grass, God takes away 1/3 of that advantage on the first trumpet. And then on the second trumpet, he takes away 1/3 of the advantage of the sea, where the sea turned to blood and the creatures in the sea died. And not only that, but he destroyed 1/3 of the ships. So whatever naval fleets that the enemy could have come up with through humanity, God has destroyed 1/3 of them. So he's taken away 1/3 of the advantage in the field. He's taken away 1/3 of the advantage in the sea. And then in the third trumpet, it says that he takes away 1/3 advantage of the fresh water. And and fresh water is what you need to sustain yourself, and you need water to live. You need fresh water. And so he takes away 1/3 of the advantage of water, because after all, Satan is privy to them because of Adam's disobedience. But in all actuality, they belong to God. So what God does in preparation to Satan trying to overthrow the throne of God, coming against God, what God does, he takes away 1/3 advantage of the fresh water. And then in the fourth trumpet sounds, he takes away 1/3 advantage of the sun, of the moon, and of the stars. So now God so whatever advantage Satan could have had in a 24-hour day, that day has been cut to 16 hours. So 1/3 of the sun is going to shine. 1/3 of the moon is going to shine. 1/3 of the stars is going to shine. So when you look at it, what you could say, you could almost look at it like you got 8 hours to rest. You got 8 hours in preparation, and then you got 8 hours where you could war. But God said, I'm gonna fix that. He took 1/3 of that away. So 1/3 of the time to rest, 1/3 of the time to strategize, 1/3 of the time, even in battle itself. So the enemy is going to have to give up something because God takes away 1/3 of the advantage of the sun that he created. He takes 1/3 of the advantage of the moon that he created. He takes 1/3 advantage from the stars that he created. Because when Lucifer left, he took 1/3 of the advantage of heaven. He took 1/3 of the angels. So now God is taking away 1/3. Lucifer took away, or Satan took away 1/3 of the advantage of heaven. Now God is taking away 1/3 of the advantage of the earth. He's taking it away from Lucifer, or now the devil, and then on the fifth trumpet, he's sending torment from locusts upon all the people on the earth except for those that have the seal of God. Those that don't have the seal of God will be tormented for 5 months by giant locusts, and their torment is the sting of a scorpion. So then after he takes away 1/3 advantage of the trees and the grass, the advantage of the field, takes away 1/3 advantage of the sea and the ships, take away 1/3 advantage of the fresh water, takes away 1/3 of the advantage of the sun, the moon, and the stars. And now in the fifth trumpet, God sent torment upon humanity, where they're tormented day and night for 5 months, tormented day and night for 5 months, and the torment is a torment as a scorpion, and so God is tormenting them, and death flees, and they say that men would hope to die, but they can't die because death has moved off of the face of the earth, because God has called in death, and death is on the face of the earth at that time. And so as much as they want to die from the torment, they can't die from the torment. And then the sixth trumpet sounds, and then God takes away 1/3 advantage of human forces. And so he takes away, he sends forth the angels, which destroys 1/3 of humanity. And you can look at it in a couple of different ways. You can look at it at Noah's 3 sons. With his 3 sons, 1/3 Japheth, which was the oldest, 1/3 Shem, which was the middle son, 1/3 Ham, which is the younger son. Each one of them could represent 1/3 of humanity. And you can look at it like, well, God chose Shem for the line of the Messiah. So that 1/3 would be the third, would be the third that God is using. And then there's 2/3 left, which is Japheth and Ham. And those would be the 2/3 that Satan is using, where Satan is expanding his forces through Japheth and through the line of Ham. That's one way you can look at it. And then the other way that you can look at it is that there are people in the line of Japheth. So he takes 1/3 of the men of Japheth. He takes 1/3 of the advantage out of Shem. He takes 1/3 of the advantage out of Ham, because we know that all Shemites are not the promised seed, but it's just only the seed of Abraham, which are the Shemites, those descendants of Shem, which is the promised seed. And so and even with them, all of them are not righteous, because you can see all down through the Old Testament where they disobeyed God, they went against God. And then we can go back to St. John 8:44 again, when Jesus says, look, God is not your father. Abraham is not your father. Your father is the devil. And he's a liar from the beginning, and you act just like him. You do the deeds of your father. And so even all of the Shemites cannot be looked at as a total righteous people. But at any rate, whether it's just he just takes Shem and set the whole line of Shem and set them aside and say they're the 1/3 of humanity that he saved, and the other 2 he destroyed. And now most of the Bible teachers, they'll probably say, well, God, he took Ham, the 1/3 of Ham, and he destroyed all of Ham, and he saved Shem. And that's what the Bible teachers would probably say. because Ham is always painted in a negative light. But really, he probably just took uh, the unrighteous out of the seed of Japheth, the unrighteous out of the seed of Shem, and unrighteous out of the seed of Ham, which made 1/3 of humanity. So he takes the advantage of 1/3 of all humanity from Satan, that Satan does not have that availability. And so now what Satan has, he has 1/3, he has 1/3 of the heavenly host at his disposal to fight against God, and he has 2/3 of humanity to fight against God. Now it's looking like it's starting to look like a battle now, because God has 2/3 of his heavenly host, and then he pulls out 1/3 of humanity. So it's looking like an even battle now, because you have a full army of God, and you have a full army of Satan. So now Satan thinks, well, I can overthrow God because he has the numbers to overthrow God. But God doesn't just let him have everything. He takes away the 1/3 of the advantage of humanity, 1/3 of the advantage uh, of uh, of the sun, moon, and stars, 1/3 of the fresh water, 1/3 of the seas and the ship, 1/3 of the trees and the grass. God takes it all away. And then at the end of that, and when the seventh trumpet sounds, God takes away his grace. He moves his favor off of the face of the earth. He moves his favor off of humanity. And so now there's no grace. There's no grace anymore. The favor of God is gone. Even after all that God did in the taking away of all the thirds and the seven trumpets, after all that God did, the people of the earth, the wicked people of the earth, they still would not repent and turn to God. And in the seventh trump, he takes away the grace. He takes away his favor, his grace. His grace is gone. And then the last thing I want to talk about is and then after we're gonna finish this session, and then next week we're gonna start getting into, we're gonna look at a couple of incidents of idol worship in the Old Testament. We're gonna look at a couple of incidents in the New Testament, and then we're gonna we're gonna wrap this thing up, and if Lord willing, we'll move to something else. If the Lord, just whatever the Lord's saying. If the Lord puts something in our heart, we'll do it. If not, then we'll move on. But now, so Satan has the force. He come to fight against God. That's what the battle of Armageddon is all about. Satan taking the forces of men and his angels to come against the armies of God, to fight against God and overthrow the throne of God. But this is when God makes a clean house. And you notice before we had two items of house cleaning that God had to take care of, which was the rebellion of angels and the disobedience of man. And now God is cleaning house. And when God cleans the house, he's putting to rest all rebellion, and he puts to rest all disobedience. And okay, yeah. And when he puts to rest all rebellion, in Revelation chapter 19, verse 20, he takes the beast, the false prophet, and he casts them into the lake of fire, because the lake of fire is the final destiny, and it is the place where God will resolve all rebellion of angels, Lucifer, and the devil. And then in Revelation 20 and 10, the devil is cast into the lake of fire. And so that means that all rebellion has been put down. Then Revelation 20 and 14, it says death and hell is cast into the lake of fire. And death is like an interim penalty for humanity. When Adam failed, God said, "You shall surely die." So death is an interim penalty that God is something that we was never supposed to have. We never were supposed to experience that, but God put that in place until he settled the issues of humanity, the issue of humanity's disobedience. He put that in place. And then hell was the penalty for rebellious angels, because the Bible says that hell was prepared for the devil and his angels. So hell was prepared for rebellion. So those that rebelled against God, hell was prepared for them. And what God does in his house cleaning, when he cleans house, he takes death and hell and casts them. In other words, the interim penalty for humanity and the interim penalty for rebellious angels, disobedient man and rebellious angels. He takes that and he casts it all into the lake of fire. There, hell finds its final rest, and death finds its final rest in the lake of fire. And then in Revelation 20 and 15, he takes man and everyone that was not written in the Lamb's book of life. They were all thrown into the lake of fire. And what God does, he takes all disobedience and he casts it into the lake of fire. And so within the lake of fire is the resolution. Is where God cleans the whole house is clean now, because all rebellion of angels, the created beings that God had given a free will, all of those beings are now that rebelled. They're cast into the lake of fire. All of those beings that had free will that he created on the earth in humanity, now though they exercise their free will against God, all of those disobedient men and women and children that were disobedient against God, he's taken every last one of them and he cast them into the lake of fire. And that is the resolution of the battle that Satan tried to overthrow God. But in the end, God wins. And I'm so glad that I'm on God's side tonight. And I hope that you're on God's side. And if you're not on God's side, I really encourage you to consider accepting Jesus Christ as your Savior, because he is the only one that will be able to bring you out when all of death and all of hell is cast into the lake of fire. He is the only one that will be able to deliver you out of that. It's called the wrath of God, and the wrath of God is going to be settled in the lake of fire. Well, all right, then we talked about Japheth, because I thought we need to talk about that because his name means expansion. And so because Ham, or people of color, they're painted as the evil and wicked people on the face of the earth. But in all actuality, and I'm not saying this to be as a racist statement, because I love everybody, and I think that people are just people. It's just that Japheth's name means expansion. His name means expansion, and the enemy needed a place to expand, and that's the way he expanded in this earth, and that's the way he built the armies of men. On the matter of fact, that is the vehicle that he is using to build the armies of men to fight against the armies of God. Well, God bless you. This is Pastor Bobby Thomas. This is The Voice. We invite you to come back and be with us again next week as we go a little bit deeper. I want you to know that eyes have not seen, ears have not heard, nor has it entered into your heart the good things that God has prepared for you. He has great things for you. He has great things for you. I pray that you be healed and be delivered and be set free by the power of God. It belongs to healing, belongs to you. Well, God bless you all. Y'all have a blessed night tonight. Those of you that will come on later, God bless you. We love you, and we're praying for you.